Okay, so first of all, I have to say I did not think I would get the amount of support that I got from the Carlist video. So I said in a post that I will continue making this type of videos while maintaining the all time lapses as well. Also, thanks for the 2.5k subscribers, I really appreciate it. With that all out of the way, let's actually start the video. So, a week ago, I posted an image that basically showed that my latest Second American Civil War took up until 1944 to end, and I asked you guys for who did you think I was playing as. And I have to say, some of you got it right. So, here's the story of how MacArthur became National Populist, leading the Western Command Center to victory. We start our adventure as always in the regular USA in 1936. Everything is as usual, everything is on fire, constant protests, fires, disasters, you name it. So my goal here was to play as MacArthur, but not just the regular MacArthur path. I was going to be playing as the Western Command Center and getting MacArthur to lead it instead of Bradley after the fall of the Federalists and Washington in the East. But to do that, I needed to find a way so that the Federalists in the East would collapse, allowing me to play National Populist MacArthur. So I designed a plan that I thought it would work, as most of the times I've never seen the Federalists surrender before almost the end of the Civil War. So I thought that the best faction to have a chance of defeating MacArthur would be the CSA, as they are at war at the very beginning, unlike the CAR, which can get a non-aggression pact for a year. This, as you will see later, would come to bite me in the ass, and instead of helping me get MacArthur, it would instead work to my detriment. Yikes. So I started to boost the CSI in every way I could, like in the events to give them power and stuff like that. Of course I was going to be playing as the WCC or the Western Command Center, so I had to prepare myself for the onslaught that would happen from Long and from the Pacifics. So I designed a fallback line using the mountains and rivers to my advantage. In the areas where there wasn't a mountain or a river, I would build some forts and bunkers to make sure my line could hold and succeed. Also, I have to say before we move forward, I disabled the ambition limit mechanic for me since, as you will see later on, because I would be losing like half of my starting land, the mechanic would kick in, and in the game size I could not fill the amount of troops with that amount of land, and making it so that my other divisions could not join the battles because of the reinforcement debuff you get. So to make my strategy work I had to disable it, but moving on from that, the elections happened and I elected Haywood and empowered the CSA with the focuses and events you get before the Civil War starts. Everything went as usual, MacArthur comes in and kicks the president out of Washington, like a chud, and the whole Civil War starts. When I got the option to switch to the WCC, I did it without thinking any of it. But as you will see later, I would discover that, well, to get MacArthur, I think it's intended for you to play as the Federalist first, but I will explain this later. So the Civil War started, I retreated to my fortifications and the fallback line, and I started getting the militias from the states I would lose access first by abandoning them. I successfully retreated to my line, and I rushed the focuses that gives you the bonuses to the army, as you need them to survive this first phase, and had to do a lot of micromanagement. And now when I say a lot, I mean a lot. I would constantly have to pull the units from other areas in the front line to reinforce, as the PSA or the Pacific States would cycle charge again and again and again and again. This basically went on for 2 years, or like a year and a half, something like that, until I had enough stockpile equipment to make some 7-2 divisions and started to go on the offensive against the Pacific. I would make little encirclements ever so often, and since they started to run out of equipment because of their massive cycle charges, I eventually pushed enough to reach the coastline and capture Los Angeles, giving me a boost in factories. The PSA at this point was dying, not only from their cycle charges and because of my push into California proper, but because they were also actively fighting against Long. Since I left the northern states, Long and the Pacific states were fighting over the control of that region. After some failed attempts to encircle more divisions in California, I moved to the longest and Pacific front and started making my pushes there. I managed to make an encirclement in the Nevada region and crushed a part of their army. With their army in shambles, having lost a handful of divisions, I made my offensive in California and managed to get both San Francisco and Sacramento, along with more encirclements, of course. I also have to mention, since I captured Los Angeles, MacArthur, which is still alive, I don't know how he survived that long, he started sending more divisions to cover some spots in my front line, so that actually helped. And while this was helpful, actually, I realized that my plan had backfired tremendously. Not only MacArthur had not capitulated, but the CSA instead was pushing into the car and long. This was bad since they had captured many industrious regions, giving them a lot of factories to work with. And that's when I thought that I might have accidentally made the CSA too powerful, trying to make the Federalists fall in the way in the east, but I was still focused on the Pacific, so I would take care of my problem later. Eventually, after many more pushes, the PSA collapsed and I was the sole controller of California and the Pacific states. With this, I could focus my efforts on killing Long and pushing east, but the problem that I had mentioned earlier had arisen once again. The CSA was too powerful and MacArthur had not capitulated. So I had two choices: pushing too long, leaving him alive somewhat, and trying to focus on the CSA, but that would mean that MacArthur would still be alive, so I would be stuck playing as Bradley and Eisenhower with the wise men path. Alternatively, I could try and just chill out and wait until the CSA killed everyone to get MacArthur, but at that point the CSA would have been too powerful to defeat, even using the Rockies to my advantage. So I had to get creative and I started testing how the whole MacArthur event chain works when Washington falls. And that's when I realized I could have gotten him way earlier and easier. So how this works is that if the Federalists have more than 90% surrender percentage, you can activate a decision where MacArthur can escape to the WCC or Western Command Center if it's still alive. So what you really want to do if you want to play as MacArthur in the Western Command Center basically is to first play as the Federalists, leave Washington and Baltimore wide open. At that point you can take the decision to retreat to the WCC. The AI will most likely always accept this, but I don't know. Then you will get an event where MacArthur becomes the leader and you can tag switch over. It's important that the Feds are still alive. That's why you must still control the other victory points the Feds have so that the Federalists can get the event where MacArthur moves to the WCC, as the event is triggered for the Federalists and not the actual WCC. So if the Feds die between this event chain, you will not get MacArthur, and I learned that the hard way. It's really complicated. I think the event where MacArthur takes over should be triggered for the Western Command Center, as I was testing how this worked, and most of the times the Federalists would just die immediately as they would get the collapse imminent debuff after they lose Washington, but that's just my opinion. So in my game I had to tag switch over to the Federalists and did all that I had to explain earlier, and because I didn't know that the final event is triggered for the Federalists instead of the WCC and they died before all that, I had to look into the game files and trigger the event myself. Okay, the factors here from the future, I'm adding this after writing the whole script for the video, as I decided after finishing the script and trying to record all this, I decided to test the whole thing again. So after further testing to make this work properly, what you want to do is, as the Federalists lose Washington and Baltimore, then you will have enough surrender limit to activate the decision. Most of the time the AI agrees to MacArthur going to WCC, so you won't have to deal with that. You will get the event of the collapse imminent, but you don't want to click it, as if you click that before the event chain happens, it's going to mess up the game, it's gonna bug out weird. So you want to wait until the event where MacArthur goes to the WCC. Then you click it, you will tag switch over to the WCC, and then finally click the collapse debuff so that the Federalists in the East die properly. And like I said, you don't have to deal with problems where they just bug out, and sometimes in my testing they would still be alive. So that I only wanted to add that. Moving on, return to the video. Well, after all that, I had MacArthur in charge, and you have a tree if that happens, which has some amazing bonuses to the army. So I pushed into this Union state and killed Long. The CSA had pushed enough into the car and they surrendered. And at the end, it was me and the CSA, and basically World War I happened, but in the Americas. I would retreat to the Rockies and I would let them bleed dry, and then I would push, but at some point the CSA would regain their strength and push me all the way back to the Rockies. At this point I was really regretting giving the CSA all those buffs, but I digress. This kept happening over and over and over and over again, and I kid you not, this happened like 6 times or something like that. But I noticed by the end of 43, not only had the CSA lost over 5 million men, but that they were also finally running out of manpower and equipment, so I saw the opportunity to finally end the war and I took to the offensive. I previously built some 14-4s, and with the 7-2s I had previously built before, I used them to start pushing east, and I just kept pushing, and pushing further to the east. At this point, like the CSA had lost so much equipment and manpower, they couldn't even replenish their troops that they had. So I just kept encircling more and more troops, and after losing 7.22 million men, and 2 million men for me, it was done. The civil war was finally over. I had won a civil war that I accidentally made more difficult trying to get MacArthur to die, but that didn't matter as I had won and stopped there. The day was 1944, the Germany had won World War II, or the Second Weltkrieg if you want to call it like that, as Russia decided not to intervene this time, and because everyone had so many divisions at this point, I decided to leave it here. I was not gonna do it, I was not gonna continue the game. And the worst thing is that because there was a new update recently and they changed the images from PGPGs to PNGs, all the leaders except MacArthur, I don't know why he still has a portrait, all of the other leaders are now missing. So even if I wanted to continue that campaign, well, all the leaders are missing, so it's kind of weird to see just a blank portrait. So I don't know, I might try and redo the campaign now that I know how to get MacArthur properly. So that was the story of how I made the Civil War more difficult and why it took me until 1944 to end the Civil War. And so yeah, that was the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. This was the Defectus signing off.